Hello, everyone, and welcome to this unsettling look at the darkest side of justice. I'm Grace, and today we would be counting down the 25 most gruesome executions carried out in 2024, starting from the least shocking and plunging into the very depths of horror at number 1. If you have the courage to continue, brace yourself. Each case is more disturbing than the last. By the end, you may feel compelled to share your own thoughts. If so, please do so in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. Now, let's begin our countdown. Number 25, Richard Bernard Moore. Let's start with a case from South Carolina that, while gruesome, barely scratches the surface of what's to come. In 1999, Richard Bernard Moore decided to rob a convenience store, presumably needing money. Reports suggest it may have been connected to personal debts or substance issues. This plan took a vicious turn when the store clerk James Mahoney drew a firearm to defend himself. Witnesses present that night recalled seeing two figures, the clerk and Moore, in a standoff near the cash register. Investigators arrived to find James Mahoney on the floor, bleeding from a chest wound. Shell casings littered the tile floor, bullet holes marking the candy shelves. Bystanders who rushed in reported the acrid smell of gunpowder still lingering. Moore's own blood was splattered on the entrance because he too had been hit in the arm. Mahoney was pronounced dead at the scene. Photographs from the coroner's office show a single bullet lodged dangerously close to his heart. From testimonies given at trial, Moore and the clerk exchanged several rounds before the fatal shot struck the clerk. The trial that followed was swift in some respects. There was little dispute that Moore fired the shot that ended Mahoney's life. However, Moore's defense argued that he never intended for anyone to die. He wanted to scare the clerk into handing over the money. After multiple appeals, the state set Moore's execution date. He spent over 2 decades in prison, during which he reportedly joined prayer groups expressing regret. In 2024, lethal injection was scheduled. Moore's last meal was generous but typical. He chose a large portion of steak, fries, and a slice of pie, though some say he barely finished it. Witnesses in the death chamber described him trembling as the chemicals entered his system. He gave a short apology, acknowledging James Mahoney's family. Observers noted tears in his eyes, but whether they represented profound guilt or mere fear of death is hard to say. Though heartbreak in this case marks only the beginning of our countdown. As we move forward, the horror and violence will intensify. Number 24, Alan Eugene Miller. Now we travel to Alabama, where in 1999, Alan Eugene Miller committed a crime that combined workplace resentment with lethal force. Miller had been fired from a company, and former coworkers described him as brooding afterward, harboring grudges. Reports indicate Miller first stormed into Ferguson Enterprises, gunning down 2 former colleagues, Lee Michael Holdbrooks and Christopher S. Yancey. Surveillance footage captured him walking through the hallway, taking aim before either victim had time to react. Witness statements suggest he then drove to post air gas, confronting Terry Lee Jarvis, his former supervisor. Multiple gunshots tore through the office. Investigators said the walls were streaked with blood, papers scattered where employees fled. One desk was overturned, presumably in an attempt at cover. Jarvis succumbed to his injuries at the scene. The evidence against Miller was overwhelming: ballistic reports, eyewitness accounts, and the immediate confession he gave to a coworker before he fled. A jury found him guilty within days of testimony. The trial revealed deep bitterness in Miller, who claimed he was singled out at work. Psychological evaluations didn't suggest a formal insanity defense. Miller's execution in 2024 used a controversial nitrogen gas method, a rarity in capital punishment. Reports from journalists stated that Miller gasped several times, his torso convulsing. Moments before the procedure, he ate hamburger steak, fries, and a baked potato. Guards noticed his shaking hands, but he spoke only to maintain, "I didn't do anything to be here," repeating the claim he was unjustly convicted. For the families of the 3 men he killed, it was an end to 25 years of appeals that they believe only prolonged their agony. As tragic as it is, we must continue. There are darker stories ahead. Number 23, Emmanuel Antonio Littlejohn. Oklahoma, witnessed one of its most perplexing capital murder cases in 1992, involving the robbery of a convenience store named Root and Scoot. The store clerk, Kenneth Mears, was shot and killed, but whether it was Emmanuel Littlejohn or his accomplice who pulled the trigger has been debated. Kenneth Mears lay behind the counter with a single gunshot wound to his torso, sprawled in a pool of blood. Shelves nearby displayed bullet holes, indicating a chaotic scuffle. Surveillance footage was inconclusive. A grainy video capturing two individuals in hoodies. One suspect fired a weapon, the other rummaged near the register. Early police statements suggested the shooter wore distinct sneakers that matched Littlejohn's. However, contradictory witness statements fueled uncertainty. The prosecution pinned the fatal shot on Littlejohn, though some insisted the second suspect was truly responsible. Regardless, Emmanuel was convicted of first-degree murder. Over the ensuing decades, Littlejohn filed multiple appeals, contending the state used contradictory theories in separate trials. His accomplice got a different story pinned on him, but the outcome didn't budge. Facing lethal injection in 2024, Littlejohn requested pizza, Coca-Cola, and cheesecake, comfort food reminiscent of simpler times. Guards reported him sitting in a corner of his cell, quietly reading a Bible. Right before the injection, he looked directly at his mother, tears in his eyes, whispering, "Are you okay?" She nodded. Then the chemicals began their work. Witnesses saw his chest rise sharply, then slow. The final breath came within minutes. This case continues to spark debate about whether the courts assign blame accurately. Nonetheless, the sorrow of Kenneth Mears' death remains the chilling centerpiece of this story. Number 22, Ivan Cantu. We turn now to Texas, land of the most frequent executions in the nation, and to a double homicide from 2001 that many found puzzling. Ivan Cantu was convicted of killing his cousin, James Mosqueda, and James's fiancée, Amy Kitchen. Investigators found James and Amy in their living room, bullet casings strewn about, furniture in disarray, as if a struggle had occurred. Forensics discovered partial footprints near the doorway, but they were never matched conclusively to Cantu. Family members described James and Amy as a happy couple preparing for a life together. Their wedding date was rumored to be set, though the invitations hadn't gone out yet. Prosecutors insisted a robbery was the motive, with Cantu seeking money. They pointed to his alleged drug addiction and financial troubles as reasons. He, however, claimed a setup, arguing unknown assailants framed him using partial evidence. Appeals spanned over 2 decades, with some wrongful conviction advocates suggesting DNA retesting. The courts, however, consistently upheld the verdict. Texas discontinued special last meals in 2011, so Cantu received the standard inmate dinner. Reports suggest it was meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and mixed vegetables. He barely touched it. In a brief final statement, he stared at Amy's family and repeated, "I never killed them." Some supporters believed him to the end, but that changed little for the grief felt by James's relatives. The lethal injection rendered him silent forever, leaving behind a swirl of doubt and speculation that might never be resolved. Number 21, Keith Edmund Gavin. An Alabama case from 1998 saw a simple delivery driver losing his life in a moment of senseless violence. Keith Gavin was the perpetrator who tried to rob the driver, but something went terribly wrong. The driver's body was found near his van, the back door still open, and boxes of goods half unloaded. A single bullet wound to his abdomen proved fatal. Pools of blood stained the asphalt. One bystander, returning from a grocery run, discovered the grisly scene and frantically called 911. Keith Gavin was arrested weeks later after police matched ballistics from his gun to the bullet found in the victim's body. Gavin's trial showcased a mountain of evidence: eyewitness accounts, ballistic matches, and even a partial confession. He claimed the gun just went off, but few believed the excuse given the close-range shot. After 26 years of appeals, Alabama set a firm execution date. Gavin refused a special last meal, asking only for a can of Mountain Dew and some ice cream. Observers found that detail odd, given how many inmates indulge in a final feast. Perhaps it reflected emotional distress. As the injection began, he murmured words that some identified as Arabic prayers. His eyes closed and his breathing became shallow. For the driver's family, it was the closing of a tragic chapter, yet the anguish of losing a loved one lingered. Number 20, Brian Dorsey. Christmas Eve, 2006, turned horrific when Brian Dorsey killed his own cousin, Sarah Bonney, along with her husband, Benjamin. He claimed financial desperation led him to their bedroom with a shotgun. Police discovered the couple in bed, apparently shot at point-blank range while asleep. Investigators recounted a disturbing scene, the bed sheets soaked in blood, brain matter spattered on the headboard. A neighbor who heard the gun blast said it sounded like a cannon in the silent holiday night. Dorsey turned himself in hours later, seemingly in shock. He admitted pulling the trigger, but insisted he never planned to kill them. He only wanted to scare them into giving him cash. The court was unmoved by pleas of impulsive behavior or dire financial straits. Testimonies showed Dorsey had threatened Sarah before, leaving many to suspect deeper malice. A guilty plea ensued, yet the death sentence remained. On execution day, Dorsey ate a large meal, fried chicken, burgers, pizza, fries, then wrote a letter of apology. The letter read like a tormented confession, acknowledging the betrayal of family. Witnesses said he locked eyes with a cousin who attended the execution, mouthing, "I'm sorry," as the lethal IV started. For Sarah and Benjamin's extended family, the holiday season now forever carries the echo of gunshots and heartbreak. Number 19, Derrick Ryan Dearman. In a single night of rage, Derrick Dearman ended 5 lives in Alabama. One of those victims was pregnant, adding an even heavier dimension to the tragedy. Responding officers were overwhelmed by what they encountered. 5 bodies, bullet shells scattered, furniture overturned, and streaks of blood across multiple rooms. Photos from that day, though never released publicly in full, were said to be so graphic that some investigators needed counseling. Reports suggest Dearman cornered his victims while they slept, ensuring minimal resistance. Shockingly, Dearman confessed. He wrote a letter to a judge declaring he was ready to accept whatever punishment was deemed fit. He waived many appeals, feeling, as he put it, "I don't want to cause more pain." Families of the victims endured a protracted legal process anyway, but eventually the date was set for 2024. A local restaurant delivered his last meal, a generous seafood platter. Dearman apparently shared final goodbyes with his father and sister earlier that day. At the gurney, he expressed regret, voice quivering as he asked forgiveness. Some relatives said it provided no solace. The unborn child's memory loomed especially large, a life never given a chance to start. Number 18, Willie James Pye. Georgia saw one of its most harrowing cases with Willie James Pye, who kidnapped and assaulted his ex-girlfriend Alicia in 1993 before ending her life. The level of brutality was so severe that local media hesitated to publish the full details. Alicia's body was discovered in a remote area. Bruises, lacerations, and signs of forced restraint pointed to a prolonged attack. Investigators found footprints around the scene, suggesting Alicia tried to escape multiple times. DNA evidence was definitive, leading straight to Pye, who had fled the city within hours. He was apprehended weeks later and stood trial. His defense tried to paint a portrait of mental instability, but the jury saw the raw cruelty displayed in the evidence and convicting statements. The death sentence was nearly unanimous. Years of appeals followed, questioning whether Pye's upbringing shaped his violence. The courts never relented. On the day of execution, Pye ordered multiple sandwiches, fries, and sodas. Guards reported he sat quietly, munching and staring at a wall, never once seeking conversation. Witnesses say his eyes remained open as the lethal dose took effect, a silent final posture that gave no closure or contrition. Alicia's loved ones remain plagued by nightmares of her desperate final moments. Number 17. Michael DeWayne Smith. Another saga from Oklahoma involves Michael Smith, who took 3 lives between 2001 and 2002, sometimes aiming at the wrong people entirely. In his first killing, Smith fired shots into a vehicle, mistakenly hitting Otis Payne Jr. Additional ballistic evidence linked him to a double homicide the same day. Janet Moore and Sarath Paluru, both gunned down over perceived slights. Moore's teenage son returned home to find her body on the living room carpet. Paluru's convenience store co-worker discovered him behind the counter, chest riddled with bullets. Investigators discovered that Smith had paranoid fears about informants, and on top of that, a short temper that escalated any minor conflict. Jailhouse letters indicated a total lack of remorse, focusing instead on conspiracies. The courts handed down the death sentence for his spree of violence. Smith followed a vegetarian lifestyle in prison, but on execution day, he merely ate leftover commissary snacks, refusing a special meal. With a casual shrug, he told the warden, "Nah, I'm good," when asked for final words. The families, enduring the memory of bullet-riddled loved ones, wondered if Smith ever truly understood the horror he created. Number 16, Taberon Dave Honie, Utah rarely carries out executions, but Taberon Honie became an exception after slaughtering his girlfriend's mother in 1998. This was not a simple break-in. It seemed a personal act of rage. The victim's throat was slashed so deeply that responding officers reportedly saw partial severance of her windpipe. Furniture in the living room was knocked over, suggesting a fight. Bloodstains were tracked onto the carpet. Neighbors mentioned hearing a single scream before everything went quiet. No one suspected the mother's daughter's boyfriend could be the culprit. Honie claimed heated passion, but prosecutors presented it as calculated murder, citing prior threats and disputes. The jury took little time convicting him. The state set an execution date decades later, attracting statewide media coverage because of Utah's rare use of capital punishment. A cheeseburger, fries, and milkshake made up his final meal. Some speculate he chose these comfort foods because they reminded him of simpler times before the crime. Asked if he had any last words, he replied he was ready to pay if it aided the family's healing. The injection was swift. Some observers noted the quiver in his foot at the end. The victim's relatives remain haunted by the image of her final, desperate struggle. Number 15, Loran Kensley Cole. Vacationers in Florida's Ocala National Forest never imagined crossing paths with a killer, yet John and Pam Edwards tragically did in 1994. Loran Cole and his friend William Paul approached the siblings, allegedly on the pretext of sharing a camping spot. John was found with his throat nearly cut open from ear to ear, while Pam, badly beaten, was found tied to a tree. She managed to escape after Cole and Paul left, stumbling half-clothed onto a dusty road. The forest floor bore signs of a violent struggle, kicked up leaves, footprints, splatters of blood forming a trail. Rescue workers found John's body near a small campfire site, the flames still flickering. William Paul took a plea deal, while Cole received the death penalty. Testimony from Pam Edwards made the jury shudder. She described Cole's chilling demeanor, how he casually threatened to kill them if they didn't cooperate. Appeals dragged on, but Florida ultimately set the lethal injection date for 2024. Cole asked for pizza, ice cream, and M and Ms. Guards recall him picking at the toppings, while lawyers say he refused final spiritual counsel. At the injection chamber, his last words were, "No, sir," when asked if he wished to speak. Pam Edwards, surviving the ordeal, expressed relief that his final breath arrived, but said she'll never erase the memory of seeing her brother's lifeless body in the forest. Number 14, David R. Hosier. Sometimes heartbreak drives lovers to extremes. David Hosier in Missouri found out Angela Gilpin wanted to reconcile with her estranged husband, and in 2009, she ended up dead. Angela's body lay in her living room. Investigators discovered bullet holes in the walls, blood trailing across the floor as if she tried to crawl to the front door. A neighbor reported hearing 2 gunshots followed by a thud. Scenes from the living room revealed shattered picture frames. One frame held Angela and her children, now spattered with her blood. Despite no DNA tying Hosier directly, circumstantial evidence and prior threats convinced jurors. He'd allegedly told friends he'd kill Angela if she dared leave him. Years of Hosier declaring innocence ended with the court's final ruling, death. On the day, he ate steak with a baked potato, calmly finishing each bite. Through a spiritual advisor, he claimed to be the luckiest man on earth, having time to express his version. But for Angela's family, seeing the living room where she collapsed, each bullet hole telling its own story, nothing about Hosier's final statements eased the pain. Number 13, Joseph Edward Corcoran. In Indiana, a shockingly close-to-home tragedy unfolded in 1997 when Joseph Corcoran opened fire on his own brother James and 3 of James's friends. 4 adults shot in rapid succession. Authorities who arrived first described the living room as a disaster zone. Blood patterns indicated the victims were sitting around chatting before being ambushed. Some had defensive wounds. Corcoran was found in a daze outside the house. He allegedly dropped the weapon when police pulled up, saying, "They were out to get me," and a psychiatrist diagnosed Corcoran with paranoid schizophrenia, but the jury nonetheless found him competent for trial. The heinousness of shooting family overshadowed pleas for leniency. He rejected most appeals, as if inviting the death penalty. He requested Ben and Jerry's ice cream, ignoring any heavy meal. Observers recall a vacant look in his eyes during the final IV prep. He said, "Just do it," refusing further words. 4 families left behind must cope with the knowledge that a routine evening turned into a massacre at the hands of a brother and friend. Number 12, Kenneth Eugene Smith. In 1988, the murder-for-hire killing of Elizabeth Sennett in Alabama rattled the local church community. Elizabeth, a preacher's wife, was stabbed repeatedly in her home, apparently orchestrated by her own husband with 2 hired hitmen, one being Kenneth Eugene Smith. Investigators found Elizabeth's body near the living room, blood smeared on the floor, indicating she tried crawling away. A table was knocked over and a lamp shattered, signs of a desperate struggle. The pastor's involvement became the grim twist. He later took his life, leaving Smith to face the brunt of the legal consequences. Smith spent 35 years on death row, launching appeal after appeal. Eventually, all options ran out. The murder-for-hire's motive, insurance money, only $1,000 was promised to Smith, a paltry sum that cost Elizabeth's life and her family's faith. In 2024, Smith was subjected to nitrogen gas. Witnesses said he convulsed for a startlingly long duration. Some claimed close to a minute. His final words, "There is no justice in this." But was there justice for Elizabeth, left to die in her own home, trusting her husband? Number 11, Kevin Ray Underwood. A small community in Oklahoma was rocked in 2006 when 10-year-old Jaime Rose Ballin vanished. Neighbors, law enforcement, and volunteers searched feverishly. No one expected her to be hidden just a few doors away. Kevin Underwood lured Jaime into his apartment, allegedly under false pretenses. Some said he promised her a snack or a game. He ended up suffocating her and stuffing her remains in a container. Police who discovered the container reported it was the single most disturbing moment of their careers. The community was horrified. Parents refused to let children out of their sight, even in this normally safe neighborhood. Underwood confessed, saying he harbored disturbing fantasies. Psychiatric evaluations validated the monstrous nature of his actions. Still, the court found him responsible for his crime. Death row awaited him for nearly 18 years, as numerous appeals highlighting mental health conditions stalled but never overturned the verdict. Underwood consumed a large meal, pizza, soda, possibly sweets. He declined chaplain services. When asked for final words, he offered a brief apology. For Jaime's family, no apology could mend the raw wound of a stolen childhood. Her case remains a terrifying testament to how quickly evil can invade an innocent life. Number 10, Ramiro Felix Gonzalez. In Texas, Ramiro Gonzalez stood accused of kidnapping, assaulting, and shooting 18-year-old Bridget Townsend. Her remains were discovered years later in a secluded area, leading to a grim sense of closure for her grieving parents. Forensic tests indicated a bullet wound to her torso, likely inflicted at close range. Investigators believed she was alive long enough to experience intense terror, given signs of a struggle. Because she wasn't found immediately, many details remain unclear, but the cold, lonely spot in rural Texas where she lay abandoned gave a haunting dimension to the case. Gonzalez confessed eventually, describing a day of panic, although the brutality suggested more than a momentary lapse. The jury swiftly delivered the death penalty. Over the years, he claimed to have found religion, writing remorseful letters from prison. In 2024, he was given lethal injection. He apologized to Bridget's family, insisting he prayed daily for forgiveness. Onlookers noticed him trembling, tears streaking his face as the chemicals flowed. Yet her family can't erase the memory of so many anxious months, not knowing if she might still be alive somewhere. Number 9. Arthur Lee Burton Houston. Texas was the setting for a chilling 1998 murder. Nancy Adelman, a devoted mother of 3, went for her routine jog and never returned. Police found her strangled with her own shoelace in a wooded area. Nancy's body bore bruises around her face, arms, and chest, consistent with a violent struggle. The shoelace was knotted so tightly around her neck that it had to be cut away by the coroner. For weeks, the community was paralyzed in fear. Was a random jogger killer on the loose? Eventually, tips led police to Arthur Burton, who confessed under interrogation but offered no real motive. Public outrage flared, demanding the harshest punishment. Prosecutors described how Nancy's final moments must have been suffocating terror, confronted by a stranger bent on harming her. A death sentence was not controversial in this context. Evidence was substantial, and Burton's admission sealed the case. Burton expressed regret in 2024, stating he lost control. A few watchers recalled him talking about demons in his head. Nevertheless, he accepted lethal injection quietly. Nancy's friends from a local running club attended the execution, remembering her as a kind spirit who never got to see her children grow up. Number 8. Freddie Khalil Owens. At number 8, Freddie Owens claimed not 1 but 2 lives in South Carolina. The first was a convenience store clerk shot during a nighttime robbery. The second, an inmate murdered in jail before Owens's trial even began. For the clerk, a bullet wound through the lower jaw, lodging in the spine. Blood spattered across the floor, the cash register left open and rummaged. In jail, Owens allegedly cornered another detainee he believed had insulted him. Guards discovered a grisly aftermath with repeated stab wounds around the victim's neck and chest. These acts removed any suggestion of leniency. Prosecutors depicted Owens as a relentless predator who seized upon any perceived slight to kill. Multiple appeals tried to argue mental illness and an unstable upbringing, but the violence was too severe. On the day, he ate a large meal of steak, chicken wings, fries, and fruit punch. He offered no final statement. Family members of both victims watched in silence as the drugs took hold, uncertain how to process their conflicting emotions: relief, sadness, even numbness. Number 7, Marcellus Khalifa Williams, Missouri, wrestled with a challenging case. Felicia Gale, a former reporter, was stabbed over 40 times in her suburban home in 1998. The prime suspect, Marcellus Williams, claimed unwavering innocence. Felicia was found in the hallway near a bathroom, blood everywhere. Autopsy reports noted a gruesome number of stab wounds, some indicating defensive attempts. Disturbingly, no conclusive DNA on the murder weapon tied Williams to the scene, fueling a debate about wrongful conviction. However, other evidence, like witness testimony and circumstantial clues, swayed jurors. Activists rallied, urging re-examination of DNA. Governors at times delayed his execution. Ultimately, new tests were said to be inconclusive, and the courts moved forward. Felicia's relatives advocated for finality, believing the system had the right man. Williams dined on chicken wings and tater tots, writing a note praising Allah. He contended that God knew his innocence. The lethal injection ended his life near midnight. Journalists covering the story pointed out the lingering question: did Missouri execute a possibly innocent man, or did they justly punish a savage killer? Number 6, Christopher Leroy Collings. In 2007, 9-year-old Rowan Ford was snatched from her own bed in Missouri. Christopher Collings later admitted taking her, abusing her, and leaving her body in a remote cave. The search party's worst nightmare materialized. They found Rowan's remains after days of scouring back roads and wooded areas. Medical examiners confirmed she was strangled, with additional signs of assault. Collings claimed he was inebriated, but that flimsy excuse provided no solace. The simplicity of Rowan's life, a child full of promise, contrasted horribly with the nightmare discovered. Collings eventually led police to the exact spot of disposal, effectively sealing his fate. The community was united in horror, leaving the sentencing a near formality. Appeals focused on Collings's alleged intoxication, but the courts were unmoved. He chose a bacon cheeseburger, breaded mushrooms, and a chef's salad. Observers said he penned a letter asking for forgiveness, though critics saw it as too little, too late. Rowan's mother spoke publicly about never erasing the mental image of her little girl's remains in that dark cave, a final memory etched forever. Number 5, Jaime Ray Mills. For the elderly Hill couple, an average day at home in Alabama turned into a living nightmare when Jaime Mills broke in, armed with a machete, a tire iron, and a hammer. Floyd Hill, 87, died almost instantly from repeated blows to the head. Vera Hill, 72, lingered for weeks, surgeons desperately removing shards of bone from her skull. Photos reveal a chaotic scene: splintered furniture, wide arcs of blood across walls, signifying savage, forceful strikes. Mills stole medication and cash before fleeing, leaving Vera barely clinging to life. Police captured Mills shortly after he attempted to pawn some stolen items. The brutality described at trial left jurors speechless. Witness after witness recounted how Floyd's face was virtually unrecognizable. He landed on death row, appeals failing over the savage evidence. Mills's final meal included shrimp, oysters, and catfish. The warden read the death warrant in a hushed tone, overshadowed by the horror of his crimes. Vera's relatives have spoken about her final days in the hospital, how she couldn't speak or see, but perhaps felt the agony of her injuries until the very end. Number 4, Garcia Glenn. White Houston, Texas, witnessed a triple homicide in 1989 when Garcia White brutally murdered Benita Edwards and her 16-year-old twin daughters. The reason? Allegedly, Benita rebuffed him. Benita's body was found in the living room with multiple stab wounds. The daughters were found in separate bedrooms, each with their throats slashed. The scene was so bloody that rescue workers had to use bleach on the floors just to move without slipping. Some investigators said the twins likely heard their mother's screams, then tried to lock themselves in separate rooms, but were overpowered. White was arrested days later and tried for capital murder. Court transcripts depict a chilling calm in his behavior during the killings, as though no empathy existed. The sentence was never in doubt. The families demanded the maximum punishment for such cruelty. He offered apologies, even singing about trusting God. Many in the victim's circle labeled it hypocritical. Execution staff reported White's final trembling breath at approximately 6:56 p.m. For 3 souls cut short in that home, any apology felt hollow. Number 3, Carrie Dale Grayson. We inch closer to the apex of this dreadful list with Carrie Dale Grayson, 19 at the time, who, along with 3 younger teens, lured Vicky DeBlue into their vehicle in 1994 Alabama. Vicky's remains were discovered in a wooded area with countless stab wounds and lacerations. Some injuries suggested torture, outraging the entire region. The younger teens avoided the death penalty due to minor status, leaving Carrie to bear that punishment alone. The savage cruelty was beyond comprehension. Prosecutors said certain wounds looked like an attempt at mutilation. Grayson's attorneys tried to argue he was influenced by the others. The chilling evidence indicated he took the lead in the assault. The jury swiftly recommended death. Almost 30 years of appeals followed, overshadowed by the memory of Vicky's horrific last moments. Alabama again resorted to nitrogen gas. Witness accounts described Grayson convulsing for at least half a minute. Officials claimed it was theatrics, but some watchers said it looked like raw terror. Vicky's family contends that whatever he felt in those final seconds couldn't match what she endured. That sense of retribution remains controversial. Number 2, Richard Norman Rojem Jr. Richard Rojem ranks second for the revolting betrayal of his ex-stepdaughter, Layla Cummings, in 1984. Layla disappeared on July 7th. Weeks later, her partially clothed and mutilated body surfaced in a field near Burns Flat, Oklahoma. Forensic specialists found multiple stab wounds, evidence of sexual assault, and signs she'd been bound at some point. The community reeled at the notion that a stepfather figure, someone meant to protect, could commit such a violation. Rojem always denied it, but the mountain of evidence, including step-family witness statements and prior altercations, pointed to him. He filed appeals for nearly 40 years, but each ruling confirmed his guilt. In 2024, the lethal injection proceeded. He'd asked for pizzas and ice cream. Observers noticed no sign of fear in his eyes. Some interpreted that as psychopathic calm. Layla's mother lived with a grief so profound that no execution could erase it. A child's trust shattered in the most horrifying way is a betrayal that places Rojem in this penultimate spot. Number 1, Travis James Mullis. Finally, we arrive at the ultimate nightmare of 2024. Travis Mullis, who took his own 3-month-old son's life by stomping on the infant. In 2008, frantic 911 calls led police to the Galveston seawall, where a passerby discovered the tiny body. The child's skull was reportedly crushed under Mullis's foot. Even seasoned detectives wept at the sight. Mullis confessed, claiming, "The crying wouldn't stop." The raw brutality manifested in a battered, defenseless infant, easily the worst crime on this list. Public outrage soared. Court psychologists found no mental defect that excused such sadism. Jurors were visibly shaken during evidence presentations. Mullis exhausted appeals, citing remorse, but families and onlookers were unconvinced any apology could suffice. In 2024, Texas administered the lethal injection. Mullis addressed the mother and relatives, acknowledging he'd done the unforgivable. The monstrous nature of crushing a helpless baby remains incomparable. Indeed, this top spot belongs to Travis Mullis, whose act stands as 2024's most profoundly disturbing crime and execution. We've reached the end of this devastating countdown. Each case shows a horrifying piece of humanity's capability for violence. We've seen betrayal, greed, jealousy, desperation, and impulses that escalated into bloodshed. If you found yourself holding your breath through these stories, you're not alone. These accounts force us to reckon with the darkest side of human choices. The debate over capital punishment often hinges on morality, deterrence, and the potential for wrongful conviction. Some of these inmates displayed flickers of regret, others left in stoic silence. For the families of victims, closure may remain elusive. No sentence can undo the trauma of a life cut short or the haunting images that linger. Thank you for joining me in this lengthy, intense exploration. These narratives are far from easy, yet understanding them might spark deeper conversations. Please share your thoughts. Do you believe justice was served, or did some cases raise doubts? Like, subscribe, and comment if you find value in confronting these unsettling truths. May we remember each victim behind these grim statistics, and may these lessons remind us how crucial it is to address violence, anger, and desperation before they erupt in irreversible ways.